Hey everybody, it's Stereo Police, and it is a Sunday afternoon. There we go, afternoon. It is hot, very hot and muggy and sticky in Central Virginia. It's 94 degrees, and when you walk outside, instantly feel like you just get sticky instantly. It's so humid. So muggy. It's not even worth being outside, not for a second. So, not going to be doing any yard work today. And therefore, I figured I would go ahead and begin the process of review of the Yamaha AS301 integrated amplifier, which you're looking at right there. It's the black one on the top. The bottom one you're looking at is the AS1100. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Those of you who are familiar with my previous vids know that my AS1100, the silver integrated on the bottom, is my favorite amp of all time. I've owned quite a few of them, and that is just my favorite. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. You know, I can't even remember all the amps that I've owned. I was trying to think of it the other night. Sitting down thinking about, if I'm going to make a statement that, such that the AS1100 is my favorite amp, and it really is, in terms of sound quality, in terms of the sound, and looks too. I really dig the retro looks in the VU meters, and the brushed aluminum faceplate, and the wood sides, and the aluminum knobs, and the fit and finish, and the feel and looks, but especially the sound. And I was trying to think of all the amps I've ever owned, just to sort of put things into perspective, and I couldn't. It was almost a struggle. It was almost a chore just to even think about that. There's so many of them, but so many of them from Lin. I've had several Lin amps. I really like the Lin products, the ones that I owned back in the early 2000s. I don't know what Lin is up to these days, but I really enjoyed those. I've owned Adcom. Enjoyed that. I've owned old classic tube amps from Sherwood. I've owned Scott equipment. I've owned Fisher. I even made a video about my Fisher tube equipment. I've owned Bogan tube equipment. I've owned Anthem tube equipment. Back in the day when Anthem actually made tube equipment, and they had a sister company named Sonic Frontiers, which is now defunct. I had an Anthem tube amp. I had Antique Sound Labs tube amp. I've had a lot of tube amps over the years. I've had NAD equipment, receivers, and integrated amplifiers. Love the NADs. And the list goes on. There's so many. I just can't remember everything. And I've had integrateds. I've had separates. It's almost a struggle even to come up with the whole list. But at any rate, out of every amp I've ever owned, and I started collecting, I'd say my introduction to mid-fi, hi-fi was probably back in the early 80s, maybe 81, 82. Actually, no, it all started in 1979. I have to correct myself. It's in 1979 I got my first good receiver when the Lafayette Corporation was going out of business. And I don't know who made the Lafayette equipment. It was like Radio Shack stuff back in the day. Someone else made it. I think the Lafayette equipment was made by Pioneer. It had the look and feel of one of those huge Pioneer receivers from the 70s. But my first... And I'll never forget I can't remember crap these days, but I remember stuff from a long time ago. The model number of the Lafayette was the LR120DB. LR stood for Lafayette Radio, 120 stood for 120 watts per channel, and DB stood for Dolby. It had this Dolby FM noise reduction system built into it that they were touting back then that never really took off. But that was my first. It was 120 watts a channel, big, huge receiver. And by today's standard, I would call it mid-fi. But that was my introduction, and from there on, lots of stuff. So 1979, between 79 and now, Out of all the receivers and amps I've ever had, this Yamaha AS1100 is my favorite. Now, why did I bring that up? There's a reason I brought that up. And the reason is because asking the question as to why would I want to review the AS301 on top. Okay, the AS1100 on the bottom is roughly $2,500 if you get it, if you buy it legitimately, with a warranty. I don't know what you can get it for on the gray market on eBay, and I can't even attest that what you're getting is the real deal. Who knows? But if you get it legit, it's about $2,500, whereas the AS301 on the top is about $350. The AS1100 is 7 times more expensive. And the AS301 is their lowest cost integrated amp that is non-digital. That's a linear amplifier. Transistors and the whole thing. No switching. So, why would I want to review this? Well, I've had a lot of people ask me along the way in comments, questions about, well, look, you know, the 1100 looks great, but I just can't afford it. It's not within my budget. And I fully understand that. Absolutely 100%. So what do you think about the Yamaha AS blah, 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 you know, whatever, the lower models? And I really couldn't answer that because the circuit topologies are so different, and I'd never heard them. And I had no idea. So I figured, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll get the least expensive AS series and see what that sounds like. And if that's halfway decent, then I think it's safe to say that as the price goes up, they'll remain at least that good. You know, if not get better. So this is a review for those, and let me also, again, here goes the non-scripted part and the tangential part. What was I going to say? So, I totally lost my train of thought. How about that? What a professional reviewer I am. What the hell was... I have no one here to remind me what I was talking about. Everything just went... Someone pushed the reset button. Okay. So the AS301 being their least expensive, and let me push... damn it. There was something I wanted to say, and I totally lost it. I'm going to hit pause here for a second while I think. Okay, I know what... It's only been like 10 seconds, and I figured it out. I can't think under pressure, I guess. I wanted to talk about the Yamaha brand. Okay, I never was, growing up, I never was a Yamaha person. And Yamaha did have a good reputation back in the 70s. They had a couple of, and maybe before that. And they had a couple of integrated amps that were coveted by people. Some of them were Class A. I think they were the CA series, maybe, don't quote me on that. But and they kind of lost. Yamaha kind of lost its prowess in high-end audio in the late '80s, mid to late '80s, and they're kind of making a comeback with their AS 1100, 2100, and 3000 right now. But there were Yamaha fans, and I never was a fan. I'm always suspect of companies that do too much and that make too much. And Yamaha is into a little bit of everything. Man, if you look at what that company does and what it makes, and audio is only one small aspect. I'm always suspect about that. There's something, and I could be totally wrong. Well, I am wrong in this case. I love the AS 1100, but I'm a little bit prejudiced when a company does too much stuff and they have one branch that just does, you know, consumer electronics, and another branch that does pianos and drums and motorcycles and engines, and too much crap. How can they be that good at something that I love if they're so diversified into all that stuff? Maybe they're just, jack of all trades, master of none. But they proved me wrong with the AS 1100, but I never was a big Yamaha person until recently. So until I got the AS 1100, and I purchased the AS 1100 with the intention of listening to it and perhaps returning it within the return period. And I purchased it based on looks alone. I liked the classic looks. I wanted a receiver at the time. I wanted an integrated amp, at the time. And I'd read about the unique circuit topology they're using, a variation of a circuitron amplifier, which was traditionally used with tubes, but they're building it out of MOSFETs. And I said, okay, I'll give it a listen. And when I bought it, it blew me away. So I'm full on board with Yamaha. I'm convinced they can make a damn good amplifier. Okay, so I'm coming from a place, I'm a recent convert to Yamaha, having been suspect of them in the past, but also knowing they had credibility back in the 70s. Now, so that's what I wanted to say. So back to the AS301. Well, okay, so we have this AS301 at $350. It's hard to imagine, and I know $350 is a lot of money to a lot of people, but that is in the high-end audio world, that would be free. You know, I mean, it's virtually free. Even in the mid-fi world, $350 is very. I mean, some people could spend that much, at night at a bar, just about. I mean, buying people drinks and stuff. It's not that much for a piece of equipment that does so much. And so just by virtue of turning it on and the light comes on and it produces something out of speakers, if it was the least bit reasonable, then this thing would be a bargain. But I want to know how close you can get, how good the sound is relative to the AS1100, and perhaps relative to some other equipment I have, such as the A1000 down there, and also, even though it's not an integrated, the Akitica amplifier. So I just want to know how good it is. And I'm doing it for those of you who can't quite afford, here's another tangent. It always reminds me of things, but, growing up, I remember, being into audio so much as a kid. I've alluded to this and discussed this before in some other vids, I can't remember, but, and going into audio shops such as Lafayette when they existed, and Meyer Emco in Northern Virginia when they were true high-end back then. They were the Bang & Olufsen dealer, they were the Klipsch dealer, and ADS and Macintosh and so many others. And just looking at that equipment, I couldn't afford anything. I would go down to like Heathkit, back when Heathkit had a store in Northern Virginia where I grew up, and you could go down there and they sold audio kits and amplifiers. They even had a couple of cool speaker kits. They were just the only thing I could afford in the store was an AM radio, and just always looking around those stores, just thinking, man, if I just had that one. It's kind of human nature. You just want that next thing that's just out of reach, whether it's you're buying a car or a house, or you're renting a house or an apartment, or you whatever you're purchasing. It's always, you find the one you can afford. And then you look at that next step up and you go, if I just had that one. But it's all relative. So what I noticed is, as I got older and got a job and, and I could afford that next step up, I would get it, but then I'd be thinking, okay, I got that next step up. This would have made me so damn happy when I was X years old. Now I want that next step up. I'm not happy anymore. Because whenever there's another step up, you never quite, at least I think it's human nature for most of us. Maybe not for you saints out there, but for you monks, but you always want that next step up. You just want to achieve that next step higher. You think that'll make you happier. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right, but it's just sort of human nature. So, like for me with the AS1100 right here, okay, so I'm thrilled with that, but there's a part of me that says if I just had the 3000, damn, there's a few features on that if I just had it at 3000. Now the AS3000 is like, I don't know, I forget the price, but it's over $7,000, I think. And that's the thing that's now out of my reach. Okay, the 1100 at 2500 was within my range, but the 3000, that's, I can't do it. Can't justify it. Wish I had it. Well, so it's all relative. Now, there are those of you, I'm trying to tie this into those who are asking about the less expensive Yamahas. There are those of you that may be only able to afford or can justify the a $500 integrated, or in this case, by the way, cheers. I am a beer drinking, shirtless audio reviewer today. Hey, it's Memorial Day weekend and I'm off, so what the hell. So, you know, there are those of you that can only afford or could afford more, can only justify this amount now. So what do you get? I'm trying this back in the AS301, and I'm also trying to say I'm fascinated with Yamaha's ability to make these good amplifiers at a reasonable price. Now, I don't consider the 3000, the AS3000 at $7,000 reasonable by any shot, by any stretch. But some of their lower, I do consider the AS1100 extremely reasonable at $2,500. I know it's a lot, but what you get is just jam-packed. Fantastic. Now, at $350, back to this, the AS301, I'm surprised the damn thing even produces heat. You know, I'm surprised it has a power cord. You can get a freaking paperweight for $350. I mean, so I'm going to find out how good it is, and I'm being long-winded, I know that, but I feel like talking today, just to piss some of you guys off. Oh, by the way, I'm on a tripod now because I got some comments on my video from yesterday about seasickness and motion, and that's probably true. You know, I take that. That's a good criticism. I'm going to try to carry my tripod with me instead of holding my camera by hand. I understand that. I accept that criticism, and I'll try to better myself on that. Self-improvement never ends. Anyway, so here we go. That's my introduction to why the Yamaha AS301, because the 1100 is so good. How good could they make a $350 amp? How close could it be? Is it worthy? Is it worth it? I think it might be. I have full faith and confidence in Yamaha. Yeah, but I don't know yet. I have only listened to this Yamaha for a short period of time through these Klipsch RP600s. I have not listened through the Cornwall 3s yet. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do two things. I am going to talk about, first, my new rating system. As a reviewer, I don't try to be like all the other reviewers. I can only use the terms that I can relate to, terminology. I can only describe what I hear, you know, I'm not trying to be like everyone else. And I don't want to study and read, you know, I read audio reviews, but I don't want to be like those guys. I'm not trying to be like a pro audio reviewer. I'm just telling you what comes to my mind and describe things in a way that I can relate to and how I hear. That's the best I can do. I'm not trying to be someone else. And that's whenever I sense that there's somebody trying to be someone else, it just in my mind I lose credibility. Just the credibility of that person goes out the window, and so I'm trying to be true to my own self. So I've come up with my own ratings system that I can relate to, and I want to talk about that right now. And I'm going to give you my ratings. From here forward, I'm going to use this system. And I'm going to walk around the room, and we're going to talk about some of the equipment I have, very briefly, and where they would stand in my new rating system. I think that's interesting. And then also, with respect to the AS301 review, I am going to start out discussing the amp, its features, how it compares with the AS1100 in terms of power and distortion and, you know, specs. And then I'm going to do an initial impression of it. So if you want to skip ahead, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm doing an initial impression of it listening to the AS301 through the Cornwalls. And by an initial impression, I'm not comparing it with anything else. I'm going to start a listening day with the AS301 hooked up to the Cornwalls, listening through my turntable and through my TAC DAC the way I normally do, just to see if anything is amiss, to see how things are. Do I even know that the AS1100 is gone? You know, that kind of thing. So I'm going to live with it. and see if anything stands out in terms of fatigability, just distortion, character of its own, anything like that. That's the first part. The second part is I'm going to talk about the hardware value of the AS301. What's in it? What do you get? How does it compare with the AS1100? Then number 3, I'm going to compare it with the AS1100. I'm going to kind of do an A-B on my own and talk about the differences, strengths, and weaknesses. And number 4, I'm going to talk about the overall value of the AS301. Seems like a lot. And it probably is a whole lot of time and effort to be spent on a $350 integrated. But we'll see how it pans out. And this might, like I said, give you guys some idea about the value of the less expensive of the Yamaha integrated. Now, let me go right into talking about my own personal rating system for audio equipment across the board. It could be speakers, amps, anything. And I'm going to read these to you. Well, you know what? Let me pull the tripod down, put this on a workbench, and I'm going to show you. Okay. Here is my rating system, in my own words. And any piece of equipment that I own, and I actually put some thought into this, even though it looks like I didn't, but any piece of equipment I own can fall into these categories. Starting from the worst to the best. Okay, the worst, not worthy. Not worthy of eardrum wear and tear. And by the way, I've had equipment that over the years that falls into every one of these categories. That's where these words I choose come from. Okay. Not worthy of eardrum wear and tear, or hardly worthy of space in a landfill. I have some in this house right now that falls into that category. Okay, one up from that is it functions. But I can't live with it in any system. It's fatiguing, or it imparts its own personality. It's got distortion. Somebody else might enjoy it, but not me. Okay? In the middle, keeping it for nostalgia only. Would otherwise not keep it or even play it. Okay, something that I always wanted growing up and I finally got. Something antique, you know. It's not that good functionally. It doesn't sound that good, but I like the looks of it, or for whatever reason, whatever period of whatever I was going through in my life that time when it was out and I wanted it, you know, it brings back a memory, something like that, right? I mean, something. Okay, next step up. Now we're in the better. Adequate. Could live with it in a second system or for background music. One up from that, very good. Could live with it in my primary system. And the peak of the pyramid, Nirvana. Warm, fuzzy feeling. I cannot live without it. Now, I will tell you, let me start out with that rating system. You know what, I'll try to keep this on the tripod so that I don't make you people seasick. AS1100, that's easy. Nirvana, can't live without it. I think I've discussed the AS1100 extensively. I'm a huge fan of it. I love it. My credibility is on the line. You guys, a lot of people have purchased it. I've got a lot of positive feedback about it. No major reviewers that I know have ever really reviewed it. I haven't actively sought reviews, but it's never been reviewed in Stereophile, and I don't know if Absolute Sound... I'm not sure if anyone's ever, any reviewer with any credibility, other than Joe Schmo and his little website, has ever really reviewed it. So I don't know what other professional reviewers think about it. I don't care. I love it. I think it's great. And many others who have purchased it have sent feedback to me also seem to agree. Okay. Now just a few more. Let's go to the Klipsch Cornwall 3s. That is right now, I think that possibly, just like Maslow's hierarchy of motivation and needs, you could possibly slip in and out of a category. Right now where I stand with the Cornwall 3s is Nirvana. That's where I stand right now. Can't live without them. Wouldn't want to get rid of them under any circumstances. Forte 3s, right over there, left and right, I am going to call very good. Could live with it in my primary system. Now those might have been Nirvana before I bought the Cornwall 3s. Okay, that's just how it works. The A1000, that amplifier right down there, an old antique, I don't know if it's antique, but classic Yamaha A1000 Class A amplifier. I'm going to call that adequate. That's where it stands. That's why it's running my second system over there. It's not running my primary system, but it's got certain characters of its own that I've discovered over time could be a little fatiguing. Not too much so. It's still got wonderful characteristics, and again, I'm calling it adequate. I could live with it in a second system or for background music. That JVC turntable right there, that I made a video about that, I restored it. Okay? It functions. I'm keeping it now for nostalgia. I won't keep it forever. It functions, but it ain't that good. Oops, I'm not sure. Okay. It functions. It's where I stand right now. It's probably gonna hit the road soon. The tuner, my Yamaha tuner. I bought that because I like listening to radio sometimes, and it fits in with my Yamaha gear with that classic look. And as far as that tuner goes, I'm not a big fan. Tuners, you don't go to a tuner for critical listening and super hi-fi. It's mostly for background music. So that's a tough one. But I'm going to say it's adequate. Adequate. Okay. My turntable, my project, Carbon Classic, I think it is. Love it. That one right there, I'm going to call it very good. Could live it in my primary system. Not Nirvana, but very good. My TAC DAC right down there. I did a whole DAC off, and ultimately, even though the shit kind of beat it out in sound to some extent, after living with the TAC for a while, it won me over. So right now, I'm not really, I didn't really fall, I mean, I'm going to call it very good. I've not really come across a Nirvana DAC yet, but it's good enough. Gets the job done. And I like the sound, I like the features of it. The shit DAC didn't have Bluetooth that I used and didn't have other features, and the TAC did, and you know, all in all. So that's where that stands. Now, these ADS speakers right here that I restored, if I'm only keeping them for nostalgia right now, but I would call it as it functions. But it really does have its own sound to it. It is a bit fatiguing, and I wouldn't be listening to them normally, but someone else might like them. They'll hit the road one day. Did I mention the Akitica down there? It's an amp, not an integrated amp, but when I drove it using the Yamaha AS1100 preamp outputs, it was pretty darn good, surprisingly good for a chip amp. And I would call it, it would vacillate between adequate and very good. Right now, my recollection is I could say it was very good. Could live with it in my primary system. Absolutely. So that's my rating system, and I'm going to come up with a rating for the Yamaha AS301 as well as eventually the Klipsch RP600s right there. But we're starting out with a review of the Yamaha, and that's where we stand right now. In my next, this is going to be part 1. In part 2 we're going to talk about, well, maybe I'll tell you what. Yeah. Let's, yeah, should I do it now? Yeah, okay, I want to roll it into this particular video since I really ought to take a break. Okay. I am going to roll it into this video. I want to introduce you to the AS301 with respect to features and differences between it and the AS1100, and go from there. And then the next video will be my first listening impression. Well, let's just talk about the features. You hit pause here and we'll regroup and do that. Okay, first let me tell you what I'm not going to review or discuss because it's beyond the scope of this particular review. I'm interested in sound. I'm interested in not high-end, but I'm interested in sound quality and a reproduction of sound. That aspect of the amp, not of all the features, but I will say this does have an optical input and a coaxial input, so therefore it does have a built-in digital to analog converter. I'm not reviewing that. I don't care. I wouldn't use it anyway. I've got my TAC. It does have a built-in Phono Preamp, And I will say the AS1100 has a built-in Phono Preamp that's fully discrete and super high quality. The Phono Preamp in this AS301 is going to be, it is an op amp base, and understandably so. This is a $350 integrated amp. So you wouldn't buy this for its Phono preamp. I think everyone knows that. I'm interested in this as a sound reproducer from a high quality source such as a DAC or a turntable with your own Phono preamp. Okay, or streaming or whatever, however you listen. So now let's start out by looking at, well, notice this. Interestingly, it is almost the same size as the AS301 on top in black is almost the same size as the AS1100 on the bottom. It's big, surprisingly big for, not quite as deep, but width-wise about as wide, and look, almost as tall. So it's a beefy looking amp. You get you get a lot of amp size-wise for $350. Okay, let's start on the left side and look at what we have. Okay, we have, of course, our power switch on the AS1100. It is a rocker style, and our power switch is a push button. And there's the light that comes on. Okay, with a push button switch. There's the relay click. Headphone, we get headphones on both. The AS1100, this is where they skimped a little bit on the AS1100. It's a op amp headphone amp, whereas the 2100 and the 3000 are fully discrete. And the same thing here, it's an op amp headphone amp. I wouldn't use really either one of these things. If I wanted, I'm not a headphone guy, but if I was, I wouldn't want the op amp one. But, they both have headphone outputs on the front panel. And here we have speaker selector, which you get off, A, B, and A plus B. Relay controlled, you heard the relays. Same down here, A, B, A plus B, and off. Of course, on the AS1100, you have VU meters and a VU control. You can turn the VU meters to peak or VU or off. There's no VU meters up here. Understandably so, again, at $350. Okay, we get bass, treble, balance, same down here, bass, treble, balance. We get a selector knob over here where we can go from line, let me zoom in on that. Okay, we can go from line 3, line 2, line 1. There's your optical and your coaxial. Those are your DAC inputs. CD, tuner, and phono, and that gives you your Phono Preamp moving magnet only. And then your volume. And then down here, and that's the AS1100, of course, doesn't have a built-in DAC. So you get main direct is when you're using an external preamp to control everything. You get line 2, line 1, you get your CD, tuner, and your phono. And there's your volume control over there. And you get a mute. Okay, back up to the 301. This is a review of the 301. You get something really cool here, and this is a pure direct mode. And in pure direct mode, which is good for you audiophiles, it's what you would want to be listening to if you did not want to listen to distortion introduced by tone controls, op amps, and other things in the signal path. It's the shortest signal path from your input to your main amplifier. It bypasses all tone controls. It bypasses your loudness control as well. And I believe it even bypasses, I don't know if it affects the balance or not. I'm going to check that out. But that's pure direct, and that's what I'm listening to. Okay, I have my input from my TAC DAC, and it will be going into CD, and I'm listening to it in pure direct mode. I don't want to use the to balance bass and treble, or the bass and treble, or the loudness, because those are op amps. I want to bypass the op amps. And I'll show you what that looks like on paper in a little bit. So this is, despite an inexpensive amp, they have thought about the audiophile. They've thought about people that care about the signal path, people like me that want to avoid op amps. And this is an aluminum, you can feel it's cold. It's a brushed aluminum black faceplate. It looks nice. It's got a nice sheen to it. These knobs are plastic, whereas the AS1100, they're machined aluminum. That's understandable for the price, but they still have a good feel to them. And they have it's just a good quality feel. Well, I'm speaking right above the camera now, so I'm hoping I'm not distorting it. I'm like right above the microphone. I just realized that. My face is right in it. And this has a classic Yamaha type of loudness control that's variable loudness. Instead of just pushing a button and you get what you get, you know, most loudness controls will increase the bass and the treble relative to the mid-range. And you get what you get. It either sounds like crap or it sounds good or you're neutral to it. But this one you get a continuously you can change that degree of loudness by rotating the knob. Pretty cool feature. If I was going to use a loudness control, this would be the one I would want. You change the degree. I mean, loudness control is a device that introduces distortion. Let's face it, that's what it does. But it introduces distortion to compensate for the way the ear hears differently at low levels versus high levels. The Fletcher-Munson curves of the ear. Go check those out. The ear perceives the relative degrees of loudness of low frequencies, mids, and highs differently if the overall sound is loud versus soft. And that's what so when you're listening to soft music, the ear perceives mid-range frequencies as being dominant, and the bass and the treble will kind of go by the wayside. And as you get louder and louder and louder, you start to hear that bass and treble that you couldn't hear. Okay, it gets amplified, not amplified, but it gets processed by your ear to make it seem like the bass and treble are amplified relative to the mid-range when you get louder. But at low levels, you just hear the mid-range. So the reason why they call it loudness control is the loudness control will amplify the bass and the treble relative to the mid-range when you're listening to things at low levels to try to simulate what the ear does when things are loud. And that's a sliding curve, okay? It's not just one thing, and that's what this, you know, as things get louder and louder and louder, that naturally sort of happens to the in the ear, and that's what this continuously variable loudness control does and allows you to do. And this was a good feature for those who would use it. And I would only ever use loudness control or bass and treble for background music, never for critical listening, because again, it is introducing artificial distortion. So, all right, that's the front panel. It looks nice. Looks alone well worth $350. Aluminum faceplate, you know, it looks fantastic. What can I say? And the size is substantial. You can see that. It's substantial. Now, let me talk about, put down my, hold on a second. Okay, I'm using the top of a Cornwall 3 as a desk. How's that? If that's not an audio review, I don't know what it is. Okay. So I put some some contrast comparison together between the AS1100 and the 301. I have the 301 on this bottom row, the AS1100 on the top. Now again, let's start out with price. The AS1100 is $2,500 if you buy it through a reputable, authorized, certified dealer with a full warranty. The AS301, a mere $350. In terms of distortion, they both measure up, at least claimed, very similar. 0.025 for the AS1100 and 0.019. You can't really compare them because they don't give me the exact same comparison here. Okay, distortion is You can measure it at different frequencies, and you can also measure it at different power levels too. So I would want to know what the distortion is at 20 hertz at full power, 1 kilohertz at full power, and maybe 20 kilohertz at full power. That's what I'd like to know. That's how I'd like to compare equipment, but they don't really tell us. Down here on the 301, they say from 10 hertz to 100 kilohertz, plus or minus 1 decibel. I'm sorry, what the hell am I doing? It's frequency response. They say 0.019%, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz at 50 watts, 8 ohms. That's pretty useful. So that tells me 0.019, reasonably low distortion. That tells me at 20 hertz, yes, I get that. Also at 20 kilohertz, and that's at 50 watts. Now that 50 watts is not the rated full power. I'd like to know what it is at rated power. You're going to tell me you have a rated power. I want to know that the distortion is low at that power. Otherwise, I don't consider that the rated power. They didn't give me that information on the 1100. Now, I don't care so much about that. I care how it sounds. I'll determine what the distortion is doing, but I'm just trying to compare the two amps, and they're comparable. Same with the frequency response. They're comparable. They're both alleged to be very wideband, out to 100 kilohertz. Damping factors are comparable. 250 for the 1100, 210. Had a whole video on damping factor. Both of those are respectable damping factors. They'll get the job done. Power, comparable. They provide power levels at 8, 6, 4, and 2 ohms, and my speakers are 8 ohms, so you get 105 watts out of the 1100 and 100 watts out of the AS301. Again, that doesn't tell me what percentage distortion those 100 watts are. I wish I knew, but hell, the speakers I run are so sensitive, these clipshes, I probably never get past a watt, so it doesn't hardly matter. Big differences are, besides price, the AS1100 has that floating balanced circuitron topology with MOSFET transistors, high dollar, expensive quality MOSFETs. You can't get that on a $350 integrated. You're going to get a standard Class AB topology with bipolar junction transistors. Now, that doesn't tell me how it sounds. And I'm not going to let that prejudice my review at all. And that's why I'm not looking into the schematic of the AS1100, the AS301 right now. That I already knew, but I'm not going to look into it. I'm going to pretend that the AS301 is a $2,500 amplifier and super high quality, and I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and listen to it and see how it stacks up. I'm not going to be prejudiced by the fact that it's $350 and that has to be reflected in the parts quality and the topological layout of the circuitry and others. Okay, not going to let that affect me. Now, I want to briefly cover what Yamaha has to say, and this will be the end part of part 1. I want to briefly cover what Yamaha has to say about first the AS1100 and then the AS301. And this will be very brief. So, the AS1100 has that float, and I covered this extensively. I won't cover it now. I covered it in my previous videos about the AS1100, but it's got that really unique circuitron type topology. You don't find this in many, if any, amps that are currently being made. And also, it uses very high quality MOSFETs. MOSFETs are the transistor equivalent, in terms of transfer function, the transistor equivalent of a vacuum tube. If there is such a thing, it would be a MOSFET. Dedicated single-ended amplifiers for all audio sources. Okay, you get all stages fully discrete, which I'm an advocate of. In other words, no awful op amps. Thorough low impedance design. You get superior quality electronic volume control, which is pretty important. It is a ladder type volume control. Large capacity power supply. You get excellent parts quality in the AS1100. You get a symmetrical design. You want your left and right channels to experience the same signal path length and go through the same components. You get VU meters on the 1100. Elegant design, luxurious real wood, blah, blah, blah. Nice, beautiful custom speaker binding post. They are excellent, by the way. And a remote control with simple design and superior texture. Okay, let's go to the AS301. What does the Yamaha website have to say? Well, it starts out by talking about high quality. Now, this is amazing when you read this stuff, because you wouldn't know by reading this it's a $350 amp. I keep coming back to that. It's virtually free. You know, in relatively speaking, when it comes to decent integrated amps. High quality circuitry design based on the top art, total purity audio reproduction technology concept. So if you want to read about that top art concept, it's about the topology, about the layout of the circuitry, and they apparently put a lot of thought and care into it. Signal purity, rigidity of support, that sort of thing. Also talks about high quality parts. They're sourcing their parts, they're alleging that, you know, so they care about the parts quality. Well, that's good. We all want that. Okay. I'm sure, you know, like their capacitors or resistors. Okay, here is that diagram of the pure direct, and you can see that without pure direct, you're going through a bass amp, a treble amp, balance, and loudness. Pure direct bypasses all of that stuff. So your input source will go directly to your main amplifier and then out to your speakers. I like that. That is a great feature. I wish all integrateds had it. There might be a time and a place for bass and treble control, maybe for background music, maybe for a party, who knows, but not for critical listening, generally speaking. That's just my opinion. They talk about the continuously variable loudness control, which, if you're going to use it, this is what you want. Excellent. You can dial in the response of the loudness control rather than just getting what you get. Oh, it talks about the digital audio inputs, the DAC inputs. You can hook up a Bluetooth adapter to it. Speakers and what else? Simple yet, okay, remote control, speakers, and there you go. Audio power standby, rotary encoder input selector. Okay, so there you go. That's what Yamaha has to say. So I believe that's a good enough introduction and the end of part one. I hope I haven't made anyone seasick today. I'm going to start my review, my listening of the AS301 through, I'm going to switch over to the Cornwalls and listen all night and all day tomorrow, and then come back with my initial impressions. I'm going to try to forget that I even switched over from the AS1100 to the 301, and just kind of walk around and try my best to forget, just to see if anything stands out, and we'll go from there. Try not to be prejudiced by anything, especially the price. Okay, well, sorry if I spoke fast. Had a lot on my mind. I think I got through everything. And I will see you on part 2 of the review of the AS301. I hope this was helpful. I hope the rest of these will be helpful. When I'm finished with this, I'll get around to the Klipsch RP600 speaker review as well. I've already done some listening to the Klipsch speakers, and I have some impressions. They might not be what you expect, but I have some initial impressions. And I need to, like any review, you got to settle in on. You got to give things time. First impressions might not be the final impressions. It happens to me a lot even with music. There have been bands that put out albums, and I'll listen to the album and I'll go, "Oh God, this is horrible. I hate this album. I like the last one. Why couldn't they do what they did on the last one?" And I find years later that album that I hated so much when it came out, I now love. It took time, you know. Well, the same thing kind of happens with audio, I think, at least with me to some degree. And vice versa too. You know, so things that initially I might not like kind of wear on me and end up liking in the end, and vice versa. Things that I think were fantastic out of the gate tend to get sour over time, or tend to grate or wear or become fatiguing, and you just, it's like that dessert that's too sweet. First bite tastes great, the 18th bite is horrible. So, gotta give things time. All right. Well, thanks everybody for chiming in, and appreciate everyone's comments, and I'll see you on part 2. Ciao.